Hey everyone! So I'm gonna take a look at the Sega Mega Drive or Sega Genesis version of Mortal Kombat 1, the very first one. This one is a particularly popular port, especially when compared to the Super Nintendo version. Now, I just assumed it was because of something really basic, like, oh, well, this version has the blood in it, if you know the blood code, which I don't, by the way. However, I found out that the Super Nintendo has other problems, particularly in terms of gameplay and controls. Anyway, so let's just get started. Alright. Okay, I guess, does it automatically set to 6-button controller? Gosh, I hope so. Alright. And let's try Lucan. Now, the reason why I want to cover this game is because I recently watched a video from Sega Lord X, who's a YouTuber that talks a lot about... Well, he doesn't just talk about Sega games, but he mostly talks about stuff from Sega. And he talked about how there are actually... a huge, what do you call it, update to, it's a ROM hack, in fact, to, oh gosh, okay, hold on a second. So yeah, there's a ROM hack to Mortal Kombat for the Genesis, which makes it even closer to the arcade version, and just to prove that the Genesis really is capable more than people give it credit, because a lot of people, you know, especially Nintendo fans, will say things like, oh well, the Super Nintendo's just superior just because there isn't blood, and I'm like, and I agree. I don't care for, you know, little stupid things like that. Ooh, blood, ooh, like novelty. Back in those days it was a big deal, but nowadays who cares? What matters most is the gameplay and to a lesser extent the graphics. But from what I can tell, the gameplay is held up really well, especially compared to the arcade version for the Genesis port. I haven't spent much time with the SNES version, but I did watch a video from another great YouTuber called, well, the channel's called Digital Foundry, and they have a series called DF Retro, and they talked about the differences between the Genesis version and the Super Nintendo version. I think they also covered a whole bunch of other ports, but those two in particular was interesting, how they talked about that nobody ever mentions just how lacking the control and gameplay was in the Super Nintendo version, where the Mega Drive or the Genesis version really was the superior port, at least in terms of gameplay. The graphics may seem very limited. In fact, just let me do a quick thing here. Oh, I cannot pause. It's okay. I'll just see if I can beat him on this round. Nope. Alright, let me quickly change it. Whoops. I'm using an emulator. Now, if we switch to NTSC mode, yeah, it looks slightly blurry, but it's still relatively sharp, especially for an old game console. Of course, this is emulated, so it would look more crisp than the actual console, especially if you're just using composite, AV composite. But when you actually play this game on the TV, it actually doesn't look so bad. It is greatly exaggerated, because when we play stuff on televisions, the NTSC standard sort of blends pixels together, so that so if there's a lot of dithering, the dithering actually becomes invisible, and it ends up just being much smoother, and it actually doubles the amount of colors that you see on the screen, because the television, particularly NTSC televisions, they kind of blend colors together, and that's just a quirk of the NTSC standard, unlike the PAL standard, which is actually a lot sharper than the NTSC standard. An NTSC television will actually have a much lower resolution or sharpness. It doesn't use digital pixels, but it uses scan lines, and those scan lines were you know, had a lower bandwidth when it came to color. But it made up for this lack of definition in the color by having a sharp, luminous image, or like black and white image that sits under the color, and people don't notice, but the colors get blended, and as a result, the dithering kind of becomes invisible. If you ever play games like Earthworm Jim, in the wormhole sequence in Earthworm Jim, how some people might be like, ugh, it looks so... the dithering is terrible. Man, I'm struggling here. The dithering is so terrible because look at all those vertical lines. But actually, you're not supposed to see the game like that. Hold on a sec. I know that this move totally works. Clearly, I'm missing something. Isn't it back, low kick, low punch to do the slide move? Or am I thinking of Mortal Kombat 2? Whatever, it's fine. Now, this isn't perfect. This game does feel slightly like there's a slight delay, although to be fair, that could be the emulator, because I have noticed an improvement in input lag when it came to running it on real hardware, to the point where there's no discernible input lag. That's how fast the original hardware was. So I'm just going to give this game the benefit of the doubt. Anyways, after Sonya Blade, I want to take a look at, before we take a look at the arcade edition, I think it's called the arcade edition, the fan hack that came out fairly recently. I, however, want to first take a look at the Sega CD version, because apparently that one is also highly regarded to be a good 16-bit port of the game. But you know, it's interesting. It's sort of a novelty playing these ports of the game, because back then it was a necessity to try to get it to run on a 16-bit console. But you know, technology is so advanced now that you can just purchase the arcade version, the original arcade version with superior sound and graphics, and run it on your modern system of choice, whether it be Xbox, PlayStation, or PC. Speaking of PC, the version of Mortal Kombat 1 that I grew up with, other than the arcade version, was actually the PC version, and that's an excellent port. And it's not just because, oh, PCs are more powerful, because back in those days, PCs actually weren't that much more powerful than console in terms of 2D graphics, 2D gameplay capabilities. But the Sega CD version does have one advantage over the PC DOS version. Okay, I forgot what I have to press to activate the... I'm pressing everything. Is it start? It has to be start, isn't it? Okay, I can't reach start with my right finger. I guess I'd have to use my left finger, my left hand's thumb or something.
Fine.
Okay, that was a little different from the arcade version. I don't remember having that kind of trouble with the arcade version. Man, he still doesn't do that slide move. I could have sworn that I knew his slide move. Okay, yeah, I must stop wasting my time with that slide move.
Fine.
Now this map would potentially look very dithered, but it looks okay, and that's really saying something. So no, I think it's an exaggeration when people say this is a terrible looking game, because it didn't look that bad back in those days. We were playing this on a CRT television, for Pete's sake, using the NTSC standard. Okay, I think this is a good opportunity to switch to the Sega CD version. By the way, I've never tried the Sega CD version, so I guess this is a first time play through this port of the game. even though the resolution's really low, I actually prefer having relatively smooth video with good color than sharp video with bad color. What? Wasn't the song made for the movie? Oh, the song was actually made for that commercial. The Mortal Monday, was it called? The promotion for the console release of this game. Okay, yeah. That makes sense. Because I was about to say there's no ways the Sega CD version came out in 1995. Surely it came out in 93, 94 when Mortal Kombat 1 was still very relevant. Because 95 was when Mortal Kombat 3 came out at arcades. Well, I don't know if we should watch this whole thing, so let's just move on. Even in the emulator, it takes a while for the game to load. There we go. Yeah, the Sega CD, I mean, look, it's worse on real hardware, but this is still, that actually sounded like the arcade version. Okay. Alright, credits. Well, I'm not going to continue. So this is probably the same as the original Genesis version, only now it's using the arcade music. Pretty sure they're just using Redbook audio capabilities. So yeah, the Sega CD had a 1x speed CD-ROM. In fact, it turns out it's not even a CD-ROM. It was actually a disk drive used, you know, primarily used for what do you call it, like hi-fi stereos and that sort of thing. And the developers, they hated working on that thing. Okay, so that's block, that's kick. Weird thing is okay, no, it is working. It's just that, okay. Actually, you know what? This is more responsive than the original Genesis version. That version was a bit sluggish. This is a much better experience. I can see why everyone says this is the definitive version on the Genesis. But again, it's a novelty of like, oh, that's what it looked like back in those days on 16-bit hardware. Because trying to get a working Sega CD is quite the process now, because the hardware reliability is not particularly good on the, well, any of the models, not just the Model 1 but also the Model 2. Yes, we can use emulators like I'm using now, but the problem you run into is, well, if you're going to play on PC, then you might as well play the arcade version on PC. Whether you do through emulation or you purchase, I think there's a Steam version currently, or maybe it's a GOG version, I can't remember. But the controls are definitely more responsive. It's very close to the arcade. Still not quite the arcade. Okay, can I do the slide thing? You know what? There's something I'm missing. Because oh, okay, there we go. Alright. I suppose, look, I did do that in the Genesis version, but you know what? I think because it was sluggish, I did it like once or twice and I just didn't time it right. And because there's like this heavy delay in the controls, it's hard to get my timing correct, and so, oh yeah, it totally works. Okay, alright. You know what's nice about this is that you don't have to hold the block, which makes sense, because the block button is sort of... Okay, now it's not doing it. Okay, there we go. Alright, I have to press back moments before I do that. So it really is just much like the arcade version. It doesn't do anything particularly... Well, okay, let me rephrase it. It's basically the Genesis version. Maybe the graphics are a bit better. But I think the real big difference would have to be the music in terms of presentation. But I would also argue the controls are makes this version worth checking out. But again, just as a novelty, just out of curiosity, because again, in modern times, if you want to play this game, play the original arcade version. Or better yet, play Mortal Kombat 2 or Mortal Kombat 3. I know that some people prefer this over those games, but I prefer 2 and 3. Especially when it comes to the ultimate Mortal Kombat 3. Okay, well, that's the Sega CD version. Alright, so now I would like to try out the arcade edition of Mortal Kombat. Here we have a red logo for the Sega logo. And that ad was actually an original ad from back in the day. Configurations, dip switches, wow, they really did go all out in terms of arcade. That's awesome. Holy moly. These images, they're so much better. Alright, let's do Raiden. Raiden's actually my favorite character. Everything's just so much nicer. Imagine if they could release this version back in the day. Now I understand why they didn't, because I think the original cartridge was something like 4 megabits, which is less than a megabyte, by the way. And the original game in the arcade was something like 32 megabits. So that yeah, it's a miracle that they even did a fairly decent job. I mean, they could have done something like this for the Sega CD version, but then again, the Sega CD takes a long time to load. So it might have been unbearable, the load times. But then again, I think it's more of an issue of cost and the amount of development time that would go into the Sega CD port. They, just to save on resources and time and money, they literally just took the Genesis version and just added the music from the arcade, and then of course they did tweak the controls and the gameplay slightly. So that's good. But this is really impressive. It's using the original Genesis music, but I mean, is that a bad thing? I never thought of the music for the Genesis version to be bad. Okay, hold on. I really don't want to lose to Kano.
Kano wins.
Whew. Yeah, doing the lightning is harder on this version. I like that they kept all of the sound effects. Like, he actually does his scream when he's what do you call it? He's flying, or his torpedo. Yeah, it's a little grainy, the sound effects, but I mean, that's to be expected. Not to say that the Mega Drive couldn't do amazing sound. It absolutely could. But again, it all comes down to storage. Because even though this game could have easily been 32 megabit ROM, I think it's actually maybe slightly smaller than that. But I think that even though the Sega CD version is really cool, this is definitely a huge improvement. But you kind of live in a time when it's like, you know, home console versions had to be like this, had to be compromised compared to the arcade version because of limits of technology, limits of the current home console systems at the time. Oh, you can't do that in Mortal Kombat 1. You can't swap the direction of your kick in mid-air. Because nowadays, just to finish up what I was saying, nowadays you have the arcade version readily available on PC, Xbox, PlayStation, and all of that stuff. So why would you even play this? And it really is the novelty. It really is just, you know, that it's kind of cool. Like, ooh, this, we could have gotten this version instead of what we ended up having. But you know what? Cartridges are expensive, and I totally understand why the publishers didn't want to fork out money for like a 16 megabit or 32 megabit cartridge. I don't know Raiden's fatality move, unless it's the same from Mortal Kombat 2. Alright, let's see. Oh my goodness, this is so much harder than I thought I actually reached that red line. Apparently not. But yeah, when I played this game for the first time, it was actually the PC version. But the first time I saw this game wasn't the PC version. It was the arcade original. I saw this back in 1992 when I was a little kid. I was also blown away. People think, oh, that's so cliche. No, really. I was like, whoa, what is this thing? Because arcade games back in those days, at least the ones that I knew of, were all cartoony and sort of wacky looking. But this was like, whoa, photorealism, and look at those cool effects. Like, one of the things I loved about Raiden, and why I actually enjoy playing him even today, not just because of how he looks, even though he has a really cool design. I like how he controls. I like, you know, I love this move. This is like my favorite move. I just try not to overdo it. Gets kind of repetitive and annoying depending on who you ask. But his design's so cool, and it makes sense because the coolest character from Big Trouble in Little China in terms of design was the Thunder guy, that guy that can control electricity and lightning, which clearly that's where Raiden came from that movie. Well, that's that. Thank you all for watching, and I'll catch you next time.